Ted Turner, one of the key founding fathers of the Monday Night War period in wrestling, the man who gave Eric Bischoff famously 2 hours on Monday nights to go head to head with Vince McMahon, has revealed that he has been diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. That was the same disease that afflicted the late Robin Williams, although I don't believe he learned about it until after the fact. He had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. I don't know when he found out or when his family found out that he had the Lewy body dementia. It might have been post-mortem, but it is the disease, one of the diseases that he suffered from. His wife, actually, Robin Williams' wife, wrote this really powerful article after his death a couple of years ago called "The Terrorist Inside My Husband's Brain." And I would encourage you all to look it up and read it. It is a devastating account of what he went through. It's basically, it's a progressive brain disorder that causes a whole host of different symptoms, behavioral changes, mood changes, forgetfulness, which Turner said he has experienced so far. He sat down with Ted Koppel to do an interview that aired, I believe it aired this morning, actually, before I sat down to start recording this show. It was recorded for the CBS Sunday Morning News. And he explained to Koppel that he's already been experiencing some of these symptoms, the memory loss. It can be very frustrating, so he's already going through it. But this is one of the quotes that he gave to Ted Koppel in this interview. He said, "It's a mild case of what people have as Alzheimer's. It's similar to that, but not nearly as bad. Alzheimer's is fatal. Thank goodness I don't have that." So he says this, but then at one point during the interview, he pauses and he says, dementia. And he's trying to think. He goes, "I can't remember what my disease is." And I'm not sure that what he said there is entirely accurate either, as far as, this not causing mortality. I don't believe that's the case. I think it very well could, or it does. But, yeah, it's just a sad thing. I mean, here's a guy who launched CNN as that first 24-hour cable news station. I mean, whatever people think of cable news and CNN today, at the time, it was a very big deal. There was no 24-hour cable news outlet. CNN was the first, and he created it. And here's a guy with a net worth of over $2 billion. I was curious. I had to look it up because I knew that he had lost a lot. His fortune wasn't quite what it once was, and I wasn't sure where his net worth stood, but his net worth apparently still, even to this day, is over $2 billion. Although the AOL Time Warner merger, which a lot of WCW people like to point to as, well, that's the reason WCW failed, ignoring all the other shit that they did to basically kill themselves. But that AOL Time Warner merger cost Ted Turner almost $8 billion. And in the end, it cost him his entire company because he got shoved out of power. But it is his influence in wrestling that I wanted to focus on here, because not just because this is a wrestling podcast, but because, and I said this on Twitter, who knows where wrestling would be today if Ted Turner had not put wrestling on those local TBS stations back in the 1970s, if he had not put, wrestling on the Superstation, or in '88, when he decided to buy Jim Crockett Promotions, which was bleeding money at the time. And then came Nitro in 1995. He wanted to know, how can we compete with Vince McMahon? The famous meeting, Eric Bischoff has talked about it. They're all sitting in a boardroom. Ted Turner looks at Eric and says, how can we compete? How can we compete with Vince? And Bischoff figuring, well, I'll just shoot my shot here. I'm not going to get it, but all right, you want to know what we need? Give me 2 hours on Monday nights. If we can compete with them head-to-head on Monday nights, that's the best way to compete with Vince McMahon. And Ted Turner, famously, shockingly, gave it to him. He turned to one of the Turner executives and said, give Eric 2 hours on Monday nights on TNT. And the rest is history. Now Bischoff may have been responsible for a lot of the creative decisions, the NWO, which was an idea that he lifted from something he had seen in Japan, and just overall, the overall direction of the company at that time. Bischoff does deserve a lot of credit for that, but it was always Ted Turner's money. It was the time on television that Turner gave to him, and it was the seemingly open checkbook that he had to sign away all of these big names from WWE, or people who had left WWE, people from Japan, the cruiserweights from Mexico. There was a lot of variety on that Nitro show. If you go back and watch it in 96, 97, but it was Ted Turner writing the checks that allowed Eric Bischoff to sign big names like Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and Bret Hart, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, among many, many others that helped turn the tide WCW's way and made it legitimately the number one wrestling promotion in the world for about 2 years or so. And even when WCW was at its hottest, it was always sort of treated as the redheaded stepchild of the Turner Empire. Not by Ted, because, everything I always read about him or quotes from him in interviews or that I've seen attributed to him over the years showed me that he liked wrestling. I don't know if Ted Turner grew up a wrestling fan or not. I don't think he did, but he liked wrestling. He respected it. He respected what it had done for him because it performed so well on his stations, many years earlier. But the same can't be said for the other executives in that company at that time. They treated it like it was a redheaded stepchild, even when WCW was making money hand over fist. And many times there were people in that company who pitched the idea of, well, let's sell it. Let's get rid of it. We don't need it on our stations anymore. And every single time it was Ted Turner who rejected the idea and said, no, I want wrestling on my stations. But that Monday Night War period also lit a fire under Vince McMahon's ass. It led to WWE eventually reclaiming the number one spot, while WCW pretty much just mismanaged itself into oblivion, which Turner was, he was powerless to do anything about that. I doubt he even knew the extent to which the company was being mismanaged. And then the merger and other things were going on. The guy didn't just run a wrestling company. He didn't even run it, owned it, but, he had CNN, he had the Atlanta Braves. This guy's a billionaire. He's got a lot of different investments. He's got a lot of different things to worry about. So what do? You delegate those responsibilities to people that you hope know what they're doing and have, the best interest of the company in mind. And unfortunately, it got to a point in WCW where the inmates were running the asylum. And, you don't need me to go into all the different stories about what was going on. There's a lot of different reasons why WCW is no longer in business. It's not just Eric Bischoff's fault. It's not just the merger. It's not just the finger poke of doom. It's sort of this combination of all of these different things. And it's still amazing to me to think back. As hot as they were back then, it was a brief period, but as hot as that company was, and they were making tens of millions of dollars, and to go from that within a year or two, apparently, to bleeding $60 million, like being in the red for tens of millions of dollars, it's just so unbelievably stupid to me. And it makes me angry. It really does make me angry because you think about how wrestling is today. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of bad. Where might things be had there been somebody competent in power running that company at that time? Or had they brought in somebody who could sort of stop the bleeding and they could, perform well enough to where they remained on Turner stations, or maybe they scored, a TV deal with someone else. WWF jumped over to TNN. Maybe WCW could have jumped over to USA. We'll never know. But it was a terrible thing for the wrestling business when WCW went under. As horrible as they were at the end, it was absolutely worse for the wrestling business overall. But I'm getting into the weeds on this a little bit. Ted Turner, though, was the man behind it. He was the one, because he can't do all the things they did without money. And without his support and without his money, there is no WCW. It's just that simple. And you can extend that out even more. There very likely is no $7 billion WWE juggernaut. There's no WWE network. There may be no WWE. I know it sounds over the top, but there's a very real possibility that WWE, without making the changes they made in the late 90s, out of, this desperate need to compete because they had no choice, financially, doesn't survive. They almost declared bankruptcy in 97. If I remember, it was actually one of the things that helped sort of reverse that trend was when they went to all 3-hour pay-per-views. Basically copied WCW, which was already doing that. WWE had the in your house shows that were 2 hours long. They made a change in the fall of 97 to go to 3 hours for every show, and they upped the price of their pay-per-views. I think they upped it by like $5 a month. All of a sudden, they started making money. All of a sudden, Vince McMahon went to Bret Hart and said, hey, that conversation we had where I said I couldn't afford to pay you anymore and I told you to go negotiate with Turner? yeah, about that, I think I can pay you now. And Brett said, well, it's too late. I already signed a deal with them. It's too late. But they were copying moves that WCW had already made. But if things go really sour for them in 97, I don't know that they make it to 1998. So for all the credit that Eric Bischoff deserves for his ideas and his contributions to WCW success, I don't think you can talk about that success without first talking about Ted Turner.